I mentioned we're doing a lot more fog sealing, all that.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon. I want to extend my thanks to John Casola for the invitation. I truly count it a privilege to be here to be able to talk about Western Federal Lands, the passion we have for the work that we do, and the area of the country that we get to do it in. So my presentation today is about our low temperature cracking and performance that we have seen over the past 25 or 30 years in using polymer modified asphalts. So first of all, some of you might not know who Western Federal Lands is or what we do. The Federal Lands Unit, we are part of Federal Highways. We're the direct construction aspect of Federal Highways. There are 3 division offices, one in Sterling, Virginia, one in Lakewood, Colorado, and mine is in Vancouver, Washington, which means I am a United States citizen. Vancouver, Washington is not associated with Vancouver, British Columbia. We actually are a suburb of Portland, Oregon, just across the Columbia River. So we develop and administer construction contracts very similar to DOT's. In fact, the Federal Lands Highway Program as a whole, about, this is a little bit dated information from about 2010. If you put us up against the DOT's as far as programs, the Federal Lands Program was about somewhere around the 18th to 20th in the nation as far as funding goes. So it's not a small amount of funding, but it is spread across the entire United States. And what we do in our administration of contracts is we administer projects that have that are either on federal land or access to federal land. And so my particular area of program from that standpoint deals with the states of Alaska, Idaho, Montana, Oregon, Washington, and the northwest corner of Wyoming, which includes Yellowstone and Grand Teton National Park. So who are our clients? So we're the road building entity for other agencies. So my office doesn't own any of the roads. We don't maintain any of the roads. What we do is we construct the projects and then we turn them over to our clients. And our clients would be the National Park Service primarily, the National Forest Service. We do some Department of Defense work in access to their military roads for the missile defense system. We do have Bureau of Indian Affairs as a client, and more specifically now, with changes in how funding goes, individual tribes can also utilize us as their road building entity. And so we do have some individual tribes that will contact us. The funding goes through those entities. We don't receive the funding. It goes through those entities, and they actually hire us essentially as a road building arm. The last part of our clients really tie in with the National Forest Service. So a lot of, back in the days of 60s, 70s, 80s, we did a lot of timber access. So in other words, access to natural forests for the purpose of timber harvest and timber sales. That has transitioned a little bit more into access to the forest from a recreation standpoint. And so oftentimes the access to the national forests, those roads are county owned or locally owned, but the Forest Service receives funding to actually have the access to them. So just a few pictures of the glorious places that I am blessed to work in. This is the East Entrance Road in Yellowstone National Park. And it's just a fabulous place to be. This is the inside highway in Grand Teton National Park. And so it gives you a little flavor for the type of roads we do, very rural in nature. This is the Going to the Sun Highway in Glacier National Park. Again, this is very typical of the type of projects we deliver. I just might add on that previous photo. So just to see the context of the cold temperature nature, that photo was taken in September, and they actually had that section of roadway just shortly after that ended up getting 4 or 5 inches of snow. So it's very typical to what we see. And then this is Denali National Park. This is in August. Denali is interesting because it only has one road that goes out to Mount McKinley and back. The paved portion is about 15 to 16 miles long, and then it turns into aggregate surface road. So this is our kind of pavement service up there is a little bit more limited. But I will say this was the first time in my career, or actually in my lifetime, that I can say I've actually been snowed on in every month of the year. And I was up there doing a pavement recon. It was the third week in August, and we received a pretty decent snowfall in the course of being there. So just from those pictures, it gives you a flavor for what type of projects that we do. They are rural, they're scenic, they're low volume, and again, the access to public lands. So it's not so much that we have traffic loading that is going to be our problem, but more in instance of the environment in which we work in. So a typical volume for us, or the higher volumes that we might see traffic loading wise, would be maybe some of the access roads into Yellowstone and some of our other national parks. Over the course of 20-year design life, we might have 2 million easels, maybe getting close to 3. That'd be on the high end. Most of our roads would be, over the course of their 20-year design life, 1 million easels, or even a little bit lower. So that gives you kind of the context of which our pavements have to perform. So what is our general pavement performance that we get out of our roads? Certainly, it's limited issues with load-related distress. I mean, environment is what really drives us as far as pavement performance. We don't really see rutting issues because we don't have a lot of heavy vehicles, but we do have to make sure that our materials, from a mix design standpoint and a material selection standpoint, is certainly stiff enough. We can't go overly soft. So to eliminate those rutting issues, we do from time to time see some raveling issues, but primarily, again, I want to focus, environmental damage is really our driver. And when we have that environmental damage, then that drives other problems with the pavement. Those are what drive us to premature failures in regard to fatigue and some of those aspects, not due to necessarily a fault of the pavement design, but due to infiltration and weakening of the subsurface layers. So to give you a flavor of what our pavement structures would be, generally speaking, thin lift of asphalt, 3 to 4 inches thick, over 8 to maybe 10 inches of base. That would be a pretty good pavement section for us. If we have to deal with frost heave, we'd have non-frost susceptible materials much deeper than that. But that would give you a little indication of type of structures that we have. So because my office covers a wide range of states, over the course of our performance with binder selection, we would try and match the binder system that is utilized in the state. So example, if we were back in the 70s or 80s, if we select a binder for Mount Rainier being in the state of Washington was an AR state, AR 4000 or AR 4000W would have been our typical binder selection, because we'd want to match what the local agencies had. So I'm just giving you kind of a rundown of the binders that we would have selected in some of our colder climates. AR 4000 and AC10, AC5 in our really cold climates, those would be what we would select. In our work in Montana was a penetration grade state, so 85-100 was a typical selection. We might have gone a little bit softer in some isolated instances, but these would have been our workhorses. So let's take a look at how they performed as recently as the late 80s. So the first project I want to show you is out of the highway is called Prineville-Logdale Highway. It's in Oregon, 60 miles east of Prineville. The binder was an AR 4000. There are the temperatures. That comes out of LTPP bind. So it's a -21 C is the average low, minimum temperature of -36 C, and this was paved in 1989. So there's just an arrow indicating where it is, Portland being up in the upper left of the screen. The reason why we got involved, this actually had access to the Ochoco National Forest, so that's why we were involved. For those of you who follow the news, over the last month and a half, this has become a very newsworthy area. Burns, Oregon is just a little bit further to the bottom right, so that's where the Malheur Wildlife Refuge is, where all the takeover and the people occupying it, that's where that's occurring, if you're familiar with that, down in the southeastern part of the state of Oregon. So, paved in '89, let's take a look at the condition of the pavement. So you can see from the picture, the pavement itself, very good condition overall with the exception of the thermal cracking issue. The thermal crack spacing, to use the paint stripe as indicators, right? So the gaps between paint stripe, tip to tip, 40 feet. So you can use that, and that's what we always kind of gauge when we go out and do our assessments. So we were getting thermal cracks in the neighborhood of 20 feet apart. And they were actually very severe. So this is 7 years after paving. You can see that it's already been crack sealed once by the county. That's who was the maintenance agency on this. And the crack has opened up substantially. So good solid pavement, not very good thermal cracking resistance. And there you can see, again, another indication of how severe the thermal cracking can be in these instances of colder climates using binders that might not be fitted, obviously, for the climate. Just using a quarter there for scale, that crack would be roughly 1 inch wide. It's already been crack sealed, and the crack sealant has already been compromised. And so this is how we would see the crack initiation from a thermal cracking standpoint, then environmentally drives the performance of the pavement. This would lead us to water infiltration, especially if it occurs, obviously occurring at the crack location, could lead to frost heave issues around the cracks, which would lead to faulting of the cracks, more breaking of the pavement, those kind of things. So that's why I say environmental conditions would primarily be our driver. So that gave us kind of just one project, but general history back in the 70s, 80s, that's what we would see. So our history of modified binder use really started in the late 80s. Charlie talked about Nevada using AC20R. That was one of our first modified binders, was an AC20R. It was used on selected projects. So we picked it and selected it on projects in Yellowstone National Park, Glacier National Park, Grand Teton National Park, very specific for looking for pavement performance, because it was really unknown to us as what to expect. In the early 90s, we went to a PBA system that was from the West Coast User Producer Group. Joe Duvall talked a little bit about that this morning. And so the PBA system was a performance-based asphalt. It was the precursor to the sharp and super paved days, but it looked at binders that would then be used for specific environments. And so we used PBA 6A based on those specifications. We had a small nuance. That's where the little A came from. The Pacific Coast Conference, the binder was actually graded as a PBA 6. And currently then we use PG binders, very similar to what the gentleman from Minnesota was just talking about. PG 58-40s and 58-34s are prime selectors for our cold climates. So first modified use, just a general indication of where that specification was. I'm not going to go through the gory details of it, but synthetic rubber, 2% minimum. It had a TNT minimum requirements, a cold temperature ductility, and then viscosities at 140-275 for the grading purposes. That was kind of the basis for the AC20R spec. Just give a comparison to our PBA 6A spec. Very similar toughness and tenacity requirements for minimum, cold temperature ductility, but the added nuance that really came out of the Pacific Coast Conference was the cold temperature pen. And not to get into too much details here, but that also led into other discussions within the Pacific Coast, just in regard to the testing, the cold temperature penetration testing, the repeatability, reproducibility of the test. But I would say still effective in getting us softer binders, modified binders that improved our performance. So let's take a look at some of that performance. West entrance of Yellowstone National Park, it was a PBA 6A, modified asphalt, average low temperature, again, off of LTPP bind of almost minus 39, minimum temperature minus 45. So again, very similar to, again, the gentleman from Minnesota discussing the cold temperatures in the northern Minnesota range. We see those as well in our national parks in these colder climates. This was paved in 1993. Just a quick snapshot, those of you who don't know where the park is. Again, it's up in the northwest corner of the state of Wyoming, so we have the borders of Montana and Idaho hanging right with us there. Yellowstone National Park and Grand Teton National Park are tucked up in that corner. So let's take a look at the performance after 6 years. Much better performance, right? good uniform pavement. You don't see a lot of thermal cracks. The thermal cracks that are existing there are still some, but they are much narrower in width and much further spaced apart. In fact, they're small enough that they're not even being sealed at this point in time. And so I would say that the maintenance organization for this would be the Yellowstone National Park themselves. They have a maintenance crew. They would be the ones that would take over the maintenance responsibilities after we would construct it. So not severe enough that they've even crack sealed. Again, just good uniform pavement. We saw great performance using this modified binder. Now I would say it wasn't without some thermal cracking. There were some, but you can tell from the character of this slide, much more narrow. The crack has been sealed. Again, good performance. And this pavement itself, even today, I was in Yellowstone National Park this past summer for other construction projects, have gone across this section of pavement with appropriate maintenance. They've done some chip sealing on it. They've done some crack sealing on it. Still performing very, very well. And again, I think I attribute part of that to material selection in the mix design process, but also the selection of a modified binder for it. This project was the one that really pointed to us to the use of modified binders and how that works in regard to environmental damage. This was East Side Highway in Grand Teton National Park. For those of you familiar, if you ever had the opportunity to go there or go skiing maybe outside of Jackson, Wyoming, if you go flying to the Jackson Airport and you head out of the airport, the first road you hit to, that's the East Side Highway. You can either head south and go into Jackson, or head north and you go up into the park. And as you head north up into the park, that's where this project is located, not too far from the Jackson Airport. There were two binders placed side by side, a PBA 6A, same spec as before, as a modified binder, and an AC-10. You can see the low temperatures and minimum temperatures there again, paved in 1994. And this is what that project looked like that fall. So it was paved in the summer. This picture was taken in October, early October, after it was paved. The other thing I want to point out on here is you'll see a couple streaks in here on both sides. There was some segregation during the course of paving that was just occurred as a construction defect. And I'll make note of those as we go into the next slide. It's condition after 2 years. So there's the AC-10 side and the modified asphalt side, the PBA 6A side. You can see the cracks along here, those were along the segregated areas. But more importantly, you'll see the thermal cracks that are already in the pavement 2 years after it was constructed. Another picture just shifting over and getting the modified asphalt side, the PBA 6A side, more in prominence in the picture. No thermal cracks, no longitudinal cracking in the segregated areas. Much better performance. Again, this is just from pavement review. So we could see we are getting good performance out of modified binders in our cold climates, and enables us to have the stiffness that we need at the upper end. A close-up of then the width of those thermal cracks. Again, after 2 years. So this leading to, again, infiltration, which will lead to other problems. Just as a side note, the lane that had AC-10 was around after 10 years of service, it was actually milled out and inlaid because of the severe cracking that was occurring. So again, not very effective use of funds in that regard as far as pavement performance, and something we did see out of our modified binders. So where are we at today? Today within Western Federal Lands, what do we utilize? We've utilized the PG binder specification since 1997. We are finding that the bending beam matches our thermal cracking performance. And what I've shown you so far was simply field reviews. We didn't have pavement management data to back that up with. These were simple field reviews that we would go out and look at pavement performance without actually having data to go with it. Since that time, we actually are able to monitor the pavement performance by getting pavement management data on our national parks. So they go out and have a cycle in which we can get data. So what have we seen? We've seen improved performance in our cold climates. Our project reviews, when we go out and do the field reviews, they are indicating that from the projects that didn't have modifieds to the ones that did in our cold climates. And I would say our cracks aren't being eliminated, but they are longer in spacing, further apart, and narrower in width. I'll get to why I think that's important, especially as we go forward. So, what about the performance data that we're getting from our pavement management system? So we obtain pavement performance data. Federal Lands actually does this as a service to the National Park Service. We go out on have a crew that goes out on tours the whole country. It's on a cycle basis. Roughly every 4 years, data is collected from a specific national park. And we get typical data that a lot of you states get as well. Rutting information, fatigue cracking information, transverse cracking, and ride. So in relation to the pavement criteria, the ride and the cracking go together and form a pavement condition rating. And so this is what that rating is. You know, very simple, 0 to 100. All those factors go together in determining what the pavement condition is. Again, just like in good pavement management practice, we want to keep the pavement as good a condition as we can, keeping it in preventive maintenance mode as opposed to letting it fall into the reconstruction mode. So that just gives you the scale about the data that I'm going to show you. So this is taken off of East Entrance Road in Yellowstone National Park. What I'm going to do is just narrow in on one section of this slide because I realize you can't see the data. So I just zoomed in on a part of that. So what you see is the year at which it was constructed. The segment that I really wanted to point to was constructed in 2006. It had a year of maintenance. So the park went out there and did some maintenance on it in 2012. SPD, that column is speed, so they just monitor the average speed of the section. SC is structural cracking, so that would be all the fatigue type cracking that is associated with the pavement management collection. The TC is transverse cracking. So constructed in 2006, in 2012 after one maintenance cycle, and now this data was collected in 2015. 9 years later, our transverse cracking index is 99. So the pavement management data is actually showing we are being effective in reducing thermal cracking, and that is really what is driving our use of modified asphalts. And again, I won't say that we necessarily pick modified asphalts, but the PG binders that we are selecting based on our environment are modified, and because they're modified, we're seeing that thermal cracking resistance and that improvement. And so what does that mean just in general summaries? I kind of have concluding remarks. One of the things I didn't present in some of my data that I wish I would have, we have done some TSRST testing on specimens and mixtures taken from these projects. So we do have the thermal cracking, the critical cracking temperatures, again matching very good with the environmental conditions that we're seeing. Like Joe Duvall mentioned this morning and some of the things that WashDOT is doing, we're doing the same things in regard to the creep recovery test. We're testing our binders in relation to that creep recovery, and where we're seeing those binders rate, we are very low on the JNR and very high on the percent recovery. And so again, that would be very indicative of what we would anticipate from the type of binders that we're seeing. So our transverse cracking values indicate good performance. That's being verified by what we see in the field. Again, those two are going hand in hand. So we're seeing good companion data with that. Again, the transverse cracks not eliminated, but reduced in frequency and reduced in width, which means for our clients that we turn the projects over to, instead of crack sealing operations, they're doing maybe chip seals or other type of seals and not having to go to the extent of trying to seal cracks that are 3/4 of an inch wide or an inch wide with crack sealing. So they're much more effective at their pavement maintenance operations. And with those narrow crack widths, it provides more cost-effective preventive maintenance solutions. And that's really what we're driving for when we, again, not owning these roads, constructing these projects, and turning them over to our clients. Again, we're not giving them something that is going to be a tough maintenance operation. We're giving them something that provides them the best product and allows them to use preventive maintenance techniques that are much more cost-effective and again, can lead to longevity and service life of the pavements which we construct. With that, I want to thank you for the for your attention. I do appreciate the fact that Federal Lands has been invited to provide our perspective. We recognize that we're kind of a small fish in a big pond when it comes to big volume roads, because that's not what our service area. But the things that we do provide in the areas that we do work, we are very passionate about, and we certainly, I certainly thank you for the opportunity to come and present our information to you. With that, I would open up to any questions.
Do we have any questions? Oh, one in the way in the back of the room. Al, can you talk loudly? Okay.
It's automated. It's automated. So the question was, how do we collect our data? It's an automated system. I can't think Pathways, if I remember that correctly, is the system that that we had purchased. The Federal Lands has purchased on behalf of the National Park Service, and so it collects that data automated. We use Wisecracks is the software that we use to analyze the cracks, and so it has cameras and scanning capabilities that we obtain that information with, and IRI information that we collect the ride data with.
Any other questions? Okay. Well, join me, please, in thanking
Thank you.
Brad.